Hello, I'm the Culture Genie, and today we are going to discuss the title of Caliph or Khalifa, and why the Caliph in theory is not a king. The title and the concept of Caliphship, Khalafatun, has a language association of coming from what is behind, or what has succeeded, or been in place of. Thus, it often means literally successor, and then you might ask, successor of what? Well, of the Prophet Muhammad in Islam. Important thing to note, Caliphs are not prophets. They don't have a direct contact with God. They are succeeding Muhammad in implementing the divine law, the divine will of God. They don't have a direct contact with God, like the prophets. Now, Khalifa, or Caliph, can also mean deputy, as in the deputy of Muhammad. But sometimes the Caliphs were also referred to as the deputies of God, especially in earlier tradition. Now, as you might know, when Muhammad died, there was actually no clear line of succession of who would succeed him as the leader of the faith. And because of this, you had the schism that resulted in 3 types of Islam. The Sunni version of Islam, the Shia version of Islam, and the Khawariji, who would later become the Ibadi movement. The Sunnis said that anyone from the line of Quraysh, which is the tribe of Muhammad, could become the leader of the faithful. That was the only stipulation they had. The Shias said that the ruler must be of the line of Ali, cousin of Muhammad. Ali had also married into the direct family of the Prophet through his daughter Fatima. So it was argued among the Shias that he had a greater claim to being the leader of the faith, as he was closer to Muhammad familiarly, as familial inheritance of power was the norm. Now, as the Shias had the principle that you would inherit the line through only Ali's line, there existed schisms afterwards due to who was the proper Caliph to inherit the successorship of Ali and Muhammad. They often couldn't agree on who was supposed to inherit the successorship among various sons of the descendants of Ali. So splits were pretty common, and I have actually made a video about the various sects within Islam, and you can look it up and see many of the splits that exist within Shia Islam due to someone considering one heir to be more legitimate than the other, and thus disagreements cause a schism in the religion. The Khawarij went on to reject the idea of caliphal authority at all, and became almost anarchistic in their views of how Islam was to be organized. Now we have established that the Caliph among the Sunnis must be a Sharif, descendant or member of the tribe of Quraysh, and among the Shia he must be a Sayyid, that is to say a descendant of Ali, that is considered a legitimate heir. Now, those of you that have viewed my video about monarchy and kingship might be thinking, but hey, isn't this rule through a bloodline the definition of kingship, as you outlined in that video? If you haven't seen the video, I highly recommend you viewing it after this video, or before, as it gives context to this video a bit. And yes, it is rulership through a bloodline, in a way. So it could be considered a monarchy. But I will go into how it is not a monarchy. And the reason as to why the Caliph is not a ruler in the same sense as a king has to do with the ruler part. Because in theory, the true ruler is God. Now, some of you might be thinking, but kings by the grace of God have existed through history also. What makes this different? Well, it's because in theory, the Caliph is not a ruler given right to rule by God. Rather, his rule is actually more of an administrator in the ideal case. A Caliph's rule is not to be a legislator in place of God, but an executive power, to take the divine law, the Sharia, and apply it through his power on the earth. More or less the only laws that a Caliph is allowed to make are laws that don't go against the Sharia, or that there is no clear legal precedent for in the Sharia. The true power is by God, who has made the rules and laws, and in the tradition of Muhammad, the divinely ordained precedents of Muhammad's actions, as Muhammad is considered the perfect ruler and man to be emulated. This is rather different from the two spheres theology present in Western Christianity about kingship, where the king is given certain rights to legislate and rule by grace of God within his sphere, and the church has its own sphere of influence as two separate spheres under God. Here the law is already given and found in the Quran and by the example of Muhammad in the Sirah and Hadith. So the Caliph is not a legislator, at least not primarily, but an executive power, to be removed if it does not conform with the law. Historically, Caliphs have not had absolutist power, though there has existed some exceptions. The Umayyad dynasty was pretty absolutist, and so have some Shia dynasties been, as the Shias actually do give some divine right to the Caliphs to actually implement laws and create laws. And it's actually not always the Caliph that interprets the divine law either. As the Sunni Law Schools developed, I would not say independently from the Caliphal office, but they were a faction with their own interests and motives. They developed or rather interpreted the laws which were to restrain caliphal power. And there actually exists a lot of laws related to rulership and how it should be implemented. It should also be noted that with the development of the schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the power of the caliph also diminished when they began to develop, as the caliph becomes less able to create his own laws, as there already was an official law in place from God. This is just normal legal things. And I haven't even touched upon the laws related directly to rulership, because those also began to take form through the formation of the legal schools. You see it in the very first treatises of the Islamic jurisprudence, like Shafi'i's Risala. But if you really want to get a good overview of the Islamic view of rulership with regards to the Caliph, I would recommend Almaguardi, who wrote an entire book on ideal rulership, Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyatu, the wisdoms of rulership or leadership rules. Almaguardi was a Shafi'i scholar, but also borrowed a lot from the Hanafi school, so it's kind of a mix between two legal traditions, but he uses them in order to discuss how a caliph should rule, what duties exist, and what merits are needed in order to become a caliph, and what disqualifies one from being a caliph. Among the things he mentions is that the caliph must be from the Quraysh, he must follow all the laws of the Sharia. But one very interesting thing, and that is present before him in earlier legal tradition, is that the caliph must be elected by electors that are composed of learned religious scholars. This actually goes back to an older tradition of Middle Eastern rulership. As you notice the pattern of being bound by divine law that constrains the leader, and having to be elected by the religious establishment. I will go into this further in the future. But let's just say that the caliphal idea might, from a secular, non-religious perspective, be the result of cultural borrowing, though you could also argue that it's a result of God having ordained a similar system in other cultures before through his prophets. That would be the religious explanation for the similarity. The important thing here is to notice that the Caliph is actually constrained in several ways by the divine law. He's not an absolutist monarch, so he's not an example of the stereotypical view of oriental despotism. Now, this is the ideal case, and there have existed exceptions, and some other views regarding caliphal authority. You have, for example, Ibn al-Muqaffa, who was of the view that the caliph should have absolute earthly authority, and the entire Mu'tazila movement, now extinct, was a huge moment in support of caliphal absolutism, and it's also one of the reasons as to why there was a lot of conflict between them and certain other branches of Islam. And you also have the founder of the Maturidi school, Al-Maturidi himself, who argued that the rulership should have larger legal authority in order to make life better for people, through a consequentialist, intentionalist argument. You see, there has been a lot of various views here, but the common view has been that absolutist monarchy is bad, and it has usually been described as mulk, or kingship dominion. The caliph is again supposed to not be the ruler, but the one that implements God's will. He has not been given divine authority to rule in God's place, but rather a divine mandate to implement God's rule, with a class of religious scholars that are there to hold him responsible if he steps out of line. It is important to know that this is an ideal theory. In practice, a lot of caliphs were hereditary monarchs. But then again, even some of the caliphs that are considered to have inherited their place were actually forced to undergo a process where people had to proclaim their loyalty for kind of election. I hope I have made it clear through this video as to why the caliph is not a ruler like a monarch. And I hope you have found this video useful and interesting. Please do make comments, as I'm open for questions and I will usually reply very soon. And don't forget to push the like button. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.